1997's Event Horizon is a cosmic horror movie directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. It's liked by audiences, panned by critics, and has been turned into somewhat of a cult classic by this point. It's also, in my assessment, 100% a Warhammer movie. But I'm going to slap a big ass asterisk on top of that because I don't think that gives the full story. I like to go through this film point by point and just give my insights as to why I think that is. But first, we need to talk about Paul Anderson. Not that Paul Anderson. That Paul Anderson. Paul W.S. Anderson's directorial debut was with 1994's Shopping. Although it didn't make a killer amount of money at the box office, with a budget of $2 million, I guess somebody saw enough of a spark in him at New Line Cinema to offer him a contract for $20 million to direct the Mortal Kombat adaptation.
It has begun!
That ended up grossing over $120 million worldwide, and showed that he definitely had the chops to direct over-the-top action movies that would eventually define his career. From there, he would go on to direct Alien vs. Predator, Death Race, Monster Hunter, and oh yeah, every single Resident Evil movie. Live-action Resident Evil movie. Which at this point may as well be its own genre. But why am I mentioning all this? It's important to point out that at the beginning of his career, Paul W.S. Anderson has always been a huge geek. Although I can't find anything specific about him growing up and interacting with Warhammer, it seems likely that he would have at least been familiar with it given his future projects, his interests at the time, and the fact that he grew up in the UK pretty close to where Warhammer 40,000 was based out of. So although he may not have been the biggest fan in the world, potentially, he was almost certainly familiar with the property. All I'm saying is don't be surprised if he ends up being a producer in the Amazon Prime Warhammer series. There is, however, a more genuine attachment between the two properties, in that being Philip Eisner, the writer of Event Horizon. Philip has gone on record saying that he was a huge 40k fan. He even played Chaos Marines and Eldar. He owned the original 1987 rulebook, so he would have been pretty knowledgeable around the setting.
It's when people have asked me is like, your description of space-time and how it drives people crazy. It sounds a lot like Warhammer 40k universes, like that an influence. And I'm like,
Or Cthulhu.
not directly. Well, but the thing is, it is Cthulhu, it is Warhammer, but Warhammer 40k is influenced by Lovecraft and Warhammer 40k, I believe. I mean, I have the 1987 original Warhammer 40k rulebook. Wow. I wargamed for 5 years, playing Warhammer 40k. I did Eldar and Chaos Marine. So when you talk about influences, it's like the influence was absolutely there. Did I make a conscious lift from 40k? No. Did I make a conscious lift from Lovecraft? Yes. In the original script, there was a vision of going through the gate, and it was a sluggish, oily sea with tentacular creatures.
Gotcha.
Under a dying red star.
By his own admission, he was inspired by the setting, but did not intentionally lift anything directly from it. Now, I'm definitely going to raise a suspicious eyebrow at that statement. Filmmaking is always a collaborative experience. There is so many moving pieces and so many creative minds that are constantly intermingling. It's nearly impossible to say how closely Paul W.S. Anderson and Philip Eisner would have collaborated when they were making this movie. So to avoid any confusion, I'm just going to refer to the creative mind behind it as Paul W.S. Anderson. Now, enough waffling. I just wanted to dispel any chance that someone believes that these two properties exist in a vacuum. Event Horizon has absolutely had an amazing influence taken from 40k, and although it isn't canon in any way, it's still a fascinating example of what a movie in the universe could look like and why it makes for such a great setting. I'll be mixing in new and old lore for this analysis, but I'll do my best to point out the differences. Things have changed a lot since 1997, and it can be very difficult to find material from that period, but I'll do what I can. I'm going to try to make this essay as beginner friendly as possible so that anybody who might be new to the setting or maybe just overheard that these movies are tangentially related can get a lot out of it. So we are now entering spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'd recommend go watch it, see how many things you can point out for yourself, and then come back and tell me which ones I missed. Now, this isn't exactly Citizen Kane, so let's just do a quick plot overview. The Event Horizon is a scientific vessel that is doing research on the outskirts of the 8th planet Neptune. It goes missing for 7 years from 2040 to 2047. After disappearing with no trace, they hear signals coming from beyond Neptune and send out another ship, the Lewis and Clark, to go investigate. Officially, the mission is a salvage and rescue mission, but there's something else going on, suspiciously. Our Lewis and Clark crew is Weir, played by Sam Neill. He's the super smart scientist man. Miller, played by Lawrence Fishburne, is the captain. Peters, Kathleen Quinlan. Stark, Jolie Richardson. Cooper, Richard T. Jones.
You okay, Doc?
Justin, Jack Noseworthy. And DJ, Jason Isaacs. And Smith, played by Sean Pertwee. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to any of them. The 40K plot summary is that this is humanity's first attempt at faster-than-light travel, but before they know about the existence of the Warp or Geller Fields. The Warp is a separate dimension that we would call Hell. It's a place that operates on pure emotion, and in this case, every awful negative emotion has taken over, leaving a horrid and somewhat thriving wasteland of death and suffering. Time does not operate in the Warp in the same way it does in real space, meaning that you could go into the Warp for just a couple of moments, and years or even decades potentially could have passed in real space. That works the other direction as well, where you could be going into the Warp for what feels like years and then come out of real space and it have only been a few moments. While traveling through the Warp, because they know you don't belong there, you're going to attract a lot of unwanted attention. As a way to combat this, humanity developed Geller Fields. These are warp shields that protect any ship with one from coming into direct contact with warp energy. Ideally, this prevents any warp entities from entering or otherwise messing with the ship. Since the Event Horizon just ripped in their raw dog in the warp, it was not as lucky with its return. Unlike 40K, we'll go through the movie chronologically, starting with the opening title. The title card indicates the first moon colony was in 2015, and Martian mining started as quickly as 2032. Now, I think we can all agree that none of that is ever happening, or at least not in my lifetime. In 2040, a ship called Event Horizon disappeared mysteriously behind Neptune. Now in 2047, there's signals from the ship, and our heroes are tasked with a possible search and rescue mission. Now, I can already hear people ringing off in the comments that this is not a 40K movie because of this timeline. And you're correct. You're right. In the events of Warhammer, humanity did not travel the stars until the Dark Age of technology / the Golden Age of expansion, which is the same thing. When humans invented FTL travel and basically solved all of our problems until at least M15, it's called the Dark Age because in the 41st millennia, most of the tech that had been discovered is lost to time and needs to be rediscovered. This is where we have to get a little bit meta with it, because even if Philip Eisner had lied and 100% intended this to be a 40K movie, it would make a lot of sense that the studio wouldn't want them to use a year that's so far out of the range of normality. Not only would that serve to separate the IP from 40K, because as far as I know, there isn't a lot of other fantasy franchises that take place around that 15,000 year era. As most sci-fi franchises are mostly contemporary, or at least somewhat recent, Alien set in 2122, Blade Runner in 2019, Back to the Future 2, 2015, etc. They're usually in the 2000s. So it'd be a little bit distracting for you to just see like the year 15,000. Or 40,000, for that matter. Throughout this entire film, the chosen aesthetic can only be described as grimdark. From the gothic designs of the ships, to the gore and the skulls on the walls, that everyone seems to just be fine with. Like, nobody ever stops and points out, like, hey, there's like skulls attached to the wall. That's kind of crazy, right? Everyone's just like, yeah, it's fine. This is what you expect.
What happened here, Doctor?
To over the top FTL drives. Look at all these goddamn spikes. Look at them. Everything is dark, bloody, and sharp.
What is mine section? And I was actually in Paris at the time, and I was walking around Notre Dame Cathedral. And of course, Notre Dame it's inspiring, but it's also scary. You know, it's it overwhelms you, as it was intended to. You know, with the majesty of God, right? It's supposed to make you feel small. And I thought, well, how great if you walk into the Event Horizon, it has that same kind of effect on you. So when I came back to LA, I said, look, we have to build the whole spaceship, the Event Horizon, out of Notre Dame, and that's what we did. So we scanned the cathedral into a computer, and then we broke apart the constituent elements of Notre Dame, and we built the Event Horizon out of it. So the towers of Notre Dame became the thruster pods, the engines of the Event Horizon. All of the ironwork is based upon the stained glass windows of Notre Dame. The antenna arrays are like kind of gargoyles. The very kind of floor plan of the cathedral is in a cruciform shape, obviously, which is the cruciform shape of the Event Horizon. And then when you go inside, the production design is all Gothic architecture. It's like flared pillars. So it was a long process, but that's how we built the interior, was out of Gothic architecture.
We are treated to the classic scene where Weir is describing wormhole travel.
Well, fuck layman's terms. Do you speak English?
And he pushes a pen through a folded up piece of
It
paper.
represents space-time, and you want to get from point A here to point B there. Folds space, so that point A and point B coexist in the same space and time. This craft passes through the gateway.
This is the best scene to point to when you're oversimplifying concepts. Now, if you think about this scene in the context of a 40K story, it's actually really funny because he is completely wrong about his entire theory. We know that within the confines of the movie itself, he's even wrong, because in a 40K context, the ship doesn't fold space, it rips into a different hell dimension where time and space doesn't behave like we're used to. Sounds pretty familiar. We can see that Weir is having a lot of existential nightmares around the future mission and also his seemingly late wife. We don't know if the nightmares are new, although we can assume, given the cause of her death, that it was extremely traumatizing and he's been having nightmares about his late wife for a while. We don't know how long that Weir has been having these kinds of existential nightmares, but we can assume that the theming of them has at least changed significantly since he was put onto the Event Horizon mission. Whenever a ship goes in or out of the void, there always has to be a little bit of give and take. Inevitably, something is going to come through whenever you do that, and it's going to affect people in different ways, especially if they don't know about it or how it affects people. It's also important to remember that how chaos interacts with real space is still quite vague, even in the modern era. So from a 1990s perspective, I'm sure it was even cloudier, so this is pretty speculative. From the recording we can hear, DJ realizes that they're speaking Latin.
I think it sounds like Latin. Sounds like liberate me something. I don't know. I can't make out the rest.
Liberate me.
Save me.
In 40K, the majority of Imperium citizens speak Low and or High Gothic, depending on your status, plus whatever local languages you might know. It is strongly implied that these two languages are English and proper Vatican levels of Latin, respectively. Since we know that humans, and especially religious zealots, have been praying to the warp and unknown gods for millennia, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and that much of that time they have spoken Latin, at least since the invention of the Catholic Church, and then they became the most powerful religious entity on the planet, it stands to reason the warp entities know it as well. It's a chicken or egg scenario where we don't know if the Catholics learned it from tapping into the warp or they taught it to the warp through prayers. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because they know it now. And since time doesn't really work the same way in the warp, maybe they've had it for millions of years. It's suggested at the beginning before eventually being said outright that the ship is alive or at least has life readings.
Bioscan is on the line. There's something wrong with the scan. I'm picking up trace life forms, but I can't get a lock on a location. These readings are all over the ship. It doesn't make any sense.
This is exactly what happens to ships in 40K after traveling through the warp. Generally, this happens to ships because their machine spirit gets corrupted and gives it new life and sentience. Quick side note. Machine spirits are basically what they sound like. They are the soul spirits of any machine that exists, whether it's your car, or a ship, or a gun, or a sword, or a suit of armor. They all house machine spirits that need to be appeased before they basically let themselves work or function. Within 40K as well, machine spirits are real, and we know this because within the world of 40K, we can often see depictions of ships communicating directly with captains and navigators. And not in an impersonal way like that a boat captain might communicate with their ship and say, "Oh, that's a good girl." No, like literally having full-on conversations. The first interaction we see with the teleporter is Justin being pulled into it. Not sucked into it, but pulled. He clearly touches the black puddle and then tries to pull back before something grabs onto him and yanks him.
My best guess as to why this guy's getting sucked into the gravity drive is that when this thing is turning on and generating a singularity, you're taking a whole bunch of matter and compressing it down into a very tiny volume, which generates enormous gravitational forces.
It's demons, bro.
Something takes hold of him and keeps him there until he's forced back into real space via the security line, indicating that there's some kind of sentient being on the other side. Justin's incident, the Lewis and Clark gets battered. The portal being opened leads to some kind of entity or demon escaping. We can see the damage it does to their ship and is clearly kept invisible, mostly, while still terrorizing them. Warp entities have a really tough time staying in real space unless they have something tying them to the dimension. And what better ride to hitch than a whole-ass spaceship whose soul has already been corrupted? This is also why the portal turns on by itself.
I mean, it was like nothing, and then Justin appeared and it was liquid.
It's just not physically possible. It would mean the gateway was open.
Well, then that's it. That's the gateway was open. That's
The
what
gateway couldn't be opened because the gravity drive wasn't activated. It
the
can't
fuck?
just
Nobody's
start up
talking
by
you.
itself.
Give me up. Nobody cares.
You are out of line.
The event horizon turned it on, so more over. And here begins the first of 4 scenes, maybe 5 scenes, that I think is the most compelling piece of evidence that this is indeed intended to be a 40K movie. Because without this context, this whole scene is basically weird and irrelevant and doesn't make a lot of sense. We learn early on that Peters has a very sick son and is also going through a very messy divorce. She's in a very emotional place, and the warp can hang on to that.
Peters, I did try to find a replacement for you, but with such short notice, it was impossible.
I talked to my ex. He's gonna take Denny for Christmas. I'll get him for the summer, so...
She's alone in the medical labs when she hears something coming from a medical tarp. When she reveals it, it's her son. And not just that, but it's her son with diseased legs that look like they're being eaten away. I obviously can't show that on YouTube, but trust me, it looks very bad and gross. You can see bone and meat showing through thin skin, nasty stuff. This, as far as I can tell, is a reference to Nurgle. It's the only disease-related horror in this entire film, and otherwise would seem very out of place. This one scene in a vacuum probably wouldn't be enough evidence, but I think that there's at least 3 other scenes that also represent chaos gods extremely effectively. And maybe you can guess at least 1 or 2 of those if you've seen it, but we'll get to them as well. Nurgle being the god of disease and decay, this would exactly be the kind of nasty shit that he would be into. The ship/warp continues to show them fucked up, traumatizing visions in order to weaken them and sow chaos. Demon 101 type shit. Whether it be a dark part of their past or someone that they lost, the demons around them know just where to poke to make them crumble.
He was screaming for me to save him. I did the only thing I could. I closed the lifeboat hatch and I left him behind. I swore I'd never lose another man.
You never told me that.
That's just it, DJ. I never told anybody. But this ship knew about it. It knows my fears. It knows my secrets. Gets inside your head and it shows you.
So during a heated discussion between the crew after Miller sees some shit, things get pretty heated.
I felt heat.
And then DJ grabs a scalpel and holds it up to the throat of Schmitty.
Shit. Do you understand? It's just a big hunk of metal.
This is the second of 4 Chaos God mentions. This one specifically for my favorite, Khorne, the god of blood and rage. When you hear Khorne's battle cry, it starts to make a little bit more sense.
Blood for the blood god! Blood for the blood god! Blood for the blood god!
Although there is another scene later that I think wraps back around with this one nicely. Not only do we see DJ uncharacteristically become extremely angry to the point of almost killing a friend of his, but we see him step away from that anger almost instantaneously, like he has no idea what he's just done.
You all right?
Yeah.
And, not to foreshadow too hard, this isn't the only time something like this happens. Some kind of corporeal being tries to bust through fully steel blast doors onto the ship's deck. We can see the metal being deformed like it's nothing. Demons have shown themselves in canon to be more than capable of having that kind of strength. And now we have the third of 4 god references, this being Tzeentch, the god of trickery, deception, and choice, importantly. The Loki of the setting, if you will. Justin is maybe slightly traumatized after being in the warp unshielded for God knows how long, and then in a coma for a bit. Since time works differently on the inside, he could have been stuck in there for years, if not longer, before being pulled out. He would have seen every horror imaginable before coming back.
It shows you things, horrible things, the dark inside me from the other place. I won't go back there. I won't. If you could see the things I've seen, you wouldn't try to stop me.
It makes sense that he would rather die than to have to live with it, but then something interesting happens. He puts himself in the airlock, ready to send himself into space, but just as he presses the button to do it, he snaps back to reality, just like DJ did. My belief here is that Tzeentch tricked him and pressured him into making a decision, quote unquote, before completely clearing his mind so he would have to live through his incredibly painful ends.
Where am I? Hey, open the door. Open the door, please.
I really like this depiction as well, because it's really hard to portray decision-making as something that's scary, even though it's probably the most relatable thing to most people. Hats off to you for that one, Phil. And to round out this quadrilogy of God mentions, we have the most famous scene in the whole movie, the blood orgy.
Dark.
Now, you were either waiting for this to come up,
You sick freak!
or maybe you haven't heard of it and I just said something crazy, but it's pretty relevant given the context of what I'm making here. Slanesh is the god of excess, meaning that anything that you overindulge in, Slanesh will exploit. In the modern era, this is generally shown as over dedication to a craft, over dedication to battle, to noise, to sound, to food, gluttony, basically the seven deadly sins. In the early days of 40K, where Slanesh was not as worked out as a character slash entity, Slanesh was used much more as the rape and torture god, where just like excessive amounts of sex, gratuitous violence, sadomasochism, those kinds of things. If you've heard about one scene in this movie without having seen it, it's probably relating to this scene right here. There isn't a lot of other media where sci-fi cannibal blood orgies are a thing, so it's kind of hard to draw that comparison from elsewhere, besides 40K and this movie. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking around for examples, so if you happen to know of any others, then drop them in the comments. I'm going to say the sadistic blood orgy in space is probably at least referencing 40K a little bit.
We came here to do a job.
We're aborting, Doctor.
A commonality in 40K ships is that every ship, especially much larger ones, need navigators. These are people that can pull themselves and ships with them into and out of the warp with psychic abilities. Doing this kind of work has a detrimental effect on the person doing it, from aging rapidly to being sickly most of the time, to tearing out your own eyeballs. It does a mental and physical wear on the user's body. What? Weird. What do you do? No, don't do that. Don't stop it.
We can see Weir tear out his eyes when he becomes the de facto captain slash navigator of the ship. We can see all manner of horrific mutations as a result of communing with the warp. Sometimes it's self-mutilation, sometimes it's warp corruption, but we can see all kinds of examples of this happening to navigators. In the modern era, navigators will have a physical third eye on their forehead that they can use to tap into the warp, but back in 1997, this wasn't a hard rule. This would also imply Weir has some psyker potential, which, although exceedingly rare, especially at the era this would have been set in, it was still possible. We find DJ's corpse gutted and tortured to death at the hands of Weir. Chaos in general loves this kind of family-friendly activity, but none more than the Word Bearers and Night Lords Chaos Space Marine Legions. These groups are experts at ritual sacrifice and nightmarish executions.
I created the Event Horizon to reach the stars. But she's gone much, much farther than that. She tore a hole in our universe, a gateway to another dimension. A dimension of pure chaos.
Warhammer is far from the first property that compares hell to chaos. We can see the comparison being drawn in Greek and Christian mythology, as well as classic fiction like Dante's Inferno. So while using this terminology isn't unique, it adds a little bit of evidence since Warhammer uses the comparison so directly. Parts of the event horizon start oozing blood until eventually we get a reference to The Shining. Although written long after this movie, there are contemporary short stories that show the same plague being wrought on different ships. This would be our possibly second and much less subtle reference to Khorne.
We see Weir covered in ritual scarring. Chaos cultists, who are just regular people that follow the chaos gods, will basically always do this as a dedication to their gods. So it makes sense that the most dedicated guy on the ship would also choose to participate.
And now, it is time to go.
The evil is defeated by superior firepower. This is a constant in 40K where, regardless of what kind of enemy you're dealing with, enough physical damage being pumped into it will defeat it. You put in enough bullets, explosive, chain swords into a demon, and it'll eventually go down. Without that understanding, killing a malignant god demon with a bomb seems very archaic. But within 40K, that's the only way it gets done. We end on a bit of a cliffhanger where it's possible that Stark is inflicted by the warp in the same way that Weir was originally.
Fine, they're with us. They're with us.
That ultimately led him to the mission that he knew he probably shouldn't have had. I guess we'll have to wait for the sequel.